Okay, the Nintendo Direct has aired and has already been universally acclaimed as one of the things that happened this year. It actually reminds me uncannily of the June 2018 Direct, which was a similar period into the Switch's life and was carried almost entirely by Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, which was great, but for anyone who didn't want just 20 minutes of Smash, the pickings were pretty slim there, and so it is here. Of course, the September 2018 and February 2019 directs that followed were absolutely amazing and legendary. So, these things do work out. And as I've said at the start of my reaction recording, often we do get lower key directs. And I actually was thinking just earlier today, perhaps we've got this all wrong and this will be a minor one. But the thing is, because we haven't had one for such a long while, it did feel like the time was ripe for a significant direct, especially since I know people say that the September one wasn't that massive, but it still did have a fair amount of content in it. And of course, the April and even the March directs of 2025 were pretty significant. You have to go back quite a while before a direct that didn't really jazz people all that much, and I think this is probably the weakest general direct for quite a few years. Still, I think it shows a degree of confidence from Nintendo that they're waiting on a lot of reveals, because I'm absolutely positive that there are more things to reveal even this year, let alone in 2027. And of course, in the past, they would have been starting to show things from the distant future. They're not doing that here. And as I keep emphasizing, this is not Nintendo's only rodeo. If anything, I almost feel they're trying to de emphasize Nintendo Direct as a venue for these kinds of reveals, but I think realistically they're just showing what they need to show right now rather than rushing to anything. They're keeping a discipline to their specific plan. So, what did they need? I think from the looks of it, they just needed to touch base with their audience and summarize where they were to mark time between the end of their Mario year and the beginning of their Zelda one. For a long time, I've said I don't see the need to go big on Zelda right now, and I was basically right that they wouldn't do the 40th this presentation, but wrong in that they did at least show us something. As it turns out, this really was the briefest glimpse, and I think for the reasons I gave in previous videos, there will be a much fuller presentation for Zelda, probably in September, but of course they could do it earlier as well. Nintendo may also feel that they don't want to massively stack the deck before September, when they're going to benefit from a pre-price bump in a sales boost anyway, due to the imminent new change in the Switch 2 price. Now, a lot of this stuff in this direct actually felt quite geared towards Japan. Xenoblade had a massive showing, Fire Emblem obviously, Switch Sports, and of course we've got Splatoon Raiders as well. And I think maybe there is an element of they want to push their Japanese content now and wait a little bit for the Western stuff for later. Of course, Ocarina of Time is a very Western game, and the presentation felt, well, frankly, very Hollywood in terms of the style and the narration, although it was also so short that it didn't really tell us all that much. It does look beautiful, but it's really hard to get any sense of what this game will fully be like. The trailer itself felt geared towards being a bombastic introduction for people who are coming to Zelda through the film, and it certainly does look next generation. It's not really something that was for my tastes in the way that it was done, but I'm still pretty confident this will be an amazing game, because at the end of the day, it's Ocarina of Time. You can't really mess it up too much. And as I said, I expected this all along to be very trad in its tastes, and this is very much the kind of thing that people have been looking for all along. Sometimes it's good not to reinvent the wheel, although I must admit, for a while when they were looking at that tapestry, I thought, what if they do a tapestry style Zelda Ocarina of Time art style? That would have been pretty crazy. Who's developing it remains, of course, a mystery, but we'll just have to wait and see on that. I also think my speculation about an Ocarina of Time shadow drop could be a goer still. If you can't surprise with the game reveal, the next best thing is to shadow drop the actual game, Metroid Prime Remastered style, and it would also sweeten the pot on September 1st after a price hike to have such a big outing on day one. As for Mario, well, from the second I saw the trailers in the build-up, I did start to wonder if they considered the Mario anniversary period still active and therefore would want to keep selling and pushing that specific suite of games. The absence of anything Mario, except arguably within Donkey Kong Bonanza, felt very conspicuous to me. I still find it difficult to imagine that there won't be a Mario game of some description this October, although to be fair, if there is, why wouldn't they reveal it now? My only thought is that they really don't want to cannibalize their existing 40th anniversary library, but frankly, I think that stuff has had plenty of time in the sun. So it does open the question of whether they have a significant Mario for this year, and if not, what that means for the next 3D Mario, since of course the alternative thing would just be to tease that. Look, lining up games can be tricky. Perhaps they genuinely couldn't get much Mario content done in the right time period because it's always difficult in the early periods of a console, and as I've said before, there's no obvious new Mario development group that is going to be ready. Probably the best shot would be EPT10, but even they already had Bell Park this year, and they just had Super Mario Bros. Wonder a few years ago. But all of the things to do with Mario do feel like the oddest part of this. Even in the form of a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, I feel like they're going to want something more from Mario before too long. I'm not sure exactly how they'll promote it, and I would normally expect it to happen in a direct, but we'll just have to wait and see. After all, even in 2020, they got the All-Stars game and Mario Kart Live Home Circuit out the door, and that was during a pandemic. Let's move on though. Xenoblade Genesis was another great reveal, as well as a triple threat of Nintendo Switch 2 editions for the Xenoblade Chronicles trilogy. I had some reactions in my other video to that. I think it's cool, but I don't have much to say without deep diving specifically, but I am very interested to see exactly who is going to be developing this game. I'm very interested to see what the battle system is like. Obviously, Monolith Soft have been expanding significantly. We know they have at least two, I believe three different groups. But does Genesis feel like a mainline title? I'm not quite sure yet. It does look beautiful, but in certain respects it looks quite different from what's gone before. At any rate, for the other Xenoblade Chronicles games, they release physically all the way through to December. Now recall that Xenoblade Chronicles X Definitive Edition had its physical Nintendo Switch 2 edition game release on the same day, right alongside Tomodachi Life, and so I think another December game on the same day is far from impossible to countenance, and it's actually a great way of hiding a big surprise by putting a placeholder game in the slot that you want to release something bigger. Switch Sports Resort looks fun, but so did Switch Sports, and it was one of the rare Nintendo titles on Switch, which I found quite disappointing personally. And so while I am, in a certain respects, quite excited to go back to the resort, I'm not quite sure that this is something that is for me. But as I said, I think if they need something to go toe-to-toe with GTA 6, something sporty probably makes the most sense, and of the current games, this is clearly the closest to GTA. Even if it's eclipsed on day one, this will be a genuine evergreen that will sell for years and years to come. I still do have confidence that there will be something Metroidy in August because they've left that entire month pretty much empty, and the 17th of September is a massive jump after Splatoon Raiders at the end of July. Now look, 8-week gaps aren't completely unprecedented for Nintendo, but I think the likelier choice is that they do still have something to drop this summer. Now, Metroid will be hype, but of course it could be a tiny Kirby spin-off or a drag and drive style digital novelty. I'm not going to say that we should get our hopes up, but even if it's not something massive, I don't think that August can be counted out. I also think an early October game is a lock, presumably Mario, but conceivably a second Zelda. All things considered, if people are feeling down about this direct, my judgment is that there is still a lot to be revealed even for this year, and I definitely think we are approaching the point where things are going to get much, much faster as we get into the third year of the Switch 2, which of course, if you think back to the Switch's third year, was when things really started to hit high gear. At any rate, I'm sure in the days to come more will occur to me, but I don't have too much to analyse right now. For those interested in my project to forecast Nintendo, though, carry on watching, as I'm just going to do a review of the forecasts from the last week or so. If not, thanks for watching. Okay, so here is a list of some of my forecasts from the last week or so. Now, these are taken from multiple videos over a period of time, at a time when the likelihoods around the direct were converging ever more on something from June. So you might see multiple versions of the broadly same forecast. The way I approach this is always that the forecasts are my judgment in the moment, and I try not to overthink them. I also try not to go back and try to see what I've done before, because you're always going to end up overthinking things, and actually on balance it tends to work out that in the very long term things do fall roughly into place, or at least that's been my experience so far. I think if you try to get a little bit too carried away with analysing what are generally smaller sample sizes, and this is a relatively small sample size, although it is quite a number of forecasts, then sometimes you can be led up the garden path a bit. But at any rate, let's have a look and see what we've got. So in terms of the 90% calls, I did enough that my total percentage was 78%. Now, the reason that it's a little bit lower is because of these two here that you can see. So a new Mario game announced in the next direct. I am incredibly surprised, and I must admit, I really can't figure it out. I can't figure out what the play is, because I think there is going to be some kind of game plan, but not to have anything Mario following up such a major movie, I find that really puzzling. Have they got something that they're going to do separately? Are they waiting for something else? I'm not quite sure, but there's obviously a reason that they're not giving any more Mario right now. Now, I suppose, of course, you could say that the Donkey Kong Bonanza extra Mario 40th anniversary thing was something that was Mario, but I don't really count that. Yeah, it's just an odd one, but there we are. Shouldn't have put it at 90%, I guess. Actually, I say that, but I think even so, you've got to think most directs, and I would hazard a guess that 9 in 10 of them probably have something Mario game related in them. Let's have a look. Either Zelda's 40th or 3D Mario in the June Direct. Now, look, technically speaking, I do think that Ocarina of Time will turn out to be a Jewel in the Crown game for the 40th anniversary, but it was not branded as such. There is no current indication that they are acknowledging Zelda's 40th anniversary at all. I absolutely believe that will be the case, but having said that, I didn't say Zelda or 3D Mario, which is probably what I should have done. I said Zelda's 40th, and therefore I can't give this one, which takes me down to 78%, as I say. I tried to get in the 80 to 100% range, obviously the sort of 10% either way of the target, so this is slightly out, but it's not the end of the world. 90% ones are actually really tricky in certain respects, because something like just a little wording slip like that can make all the difference. And of course, they're quite unforgiving because you do need to get a lot of them right. But there we are. That's part of the fun of this sort of thing. 70%. So direct by the end of July. Yes, obviously that was back when the direct was not a certainty. 70% the next 3D Mario will be teased. Well, no, that was obviously a judgment at a different time. Koizumi will primarily host the next direct. Yes. June direct will exist and be a general direct. Yes. There'll be 4 or more new first-party games revealed to the next Nintendo Direct. Okay, so here's one where I could interpret it different ways, but I know what I had in mind with this, and I should probably think of a way to make it clearer going forward, which is that Nintendo Switch 2 edition games do count. Now, having said that, the editions seem relatively minor, 2 or 3, fun, but not as massive as Bella Bell Park or the Star-Crossed World add-on to previous games. But you know what, even so, I think it's just for consistency easier not to try to split hairs about what's new and what's not, and just say, look, if it's a Nintendo Switch 2 edition that's releasing on the Switch 2, it is effectively a new game, and that's why I would say that this does count as there being 4 or more new first-party games. In fact, with the 3 Xenoblades, there are 6, although I appreciate that the hype level for a number of those, unless you're a big Xenoblade fan, which a number of people are, is possibly not as great as it might be. Then we've got 70%, at least one new Nintendo Switch 2 edition featured in the next General Direct. Well, yeah, there definitely was. Zelda is mentioned or featured in any way in a June Nintendo Direct. Yep. Well, technically Zelda wasn't, but the Zelda game was. Some kind of free upgrade for an existing game, Tomodachi Life, Bacopia, Mario Kart in the June Direct. I really thought there'd be more on Tomodachi Life. If anything, I thought Bacopia was the one that would be saved for an August Pokemon Presents. But yeah, I'm surprised they didn't do more with Tomodachi right now, because it is a big game for them. You would kind of expect some kind of victory lap, but perhaps it's a little bit too soon. Although having said that, they didn't mind waiting only a couple of months to revisit Donkey Kong Bonanza, so who knows. 70% also, the next General Direct will include at least one reveal for Beyond 2026. Yes, we got that with Xenoblade Genesis and some kind of reference to Duskbloods. There was a reference, but it was pretty minor. 70% a Switch 1 reveal in the June Direct. Well, I don't think there was a reveal for a first-party game, that's what I'm counting. So again, I'm sure there were reveals for other types of games, but I suppose I could try to be more specific in advance. But when I judge these, I try to reflect what I honestly was trying to convey at the time, rather than to try to split hairs. I meant a first party reveal, and so I'm going to put that as a no. That means that I am actually slightly over for my 70% groups, and I've got 82% of those correct, which means it's actually better than the 90%. So again, that's the sort of thing that happens sometimes. Generally speaking, I think from last year I was slightly under 70% overall. So these things take their own shape. 50% then, let's have a look. So we've got Zelda mentioned in Direct for August. Yes. 2 new Mario announcements in the next Direct. No. The word Galaxy I didn't hear mentioned. Someone can prove me wrong, but I didn't hear it. 6 or more new first-party games as I defined them. Yes, there are. Miyamoto appears in a June Nintendo Direct. No. New Zelda title. Yep. Amiibo mentioned. Didn't hear any. Nintendo Switch 2 editions for Super Smash Bros. Ultimate, Switch Sports, Super Mario Odyssey, and or Luigi's Mansion 3. You see, that wasn't a very well conceived forecast. Again, when you do a few of these quite quickly, it's easy to get into a rhythm of, okay, how can I sort these out in a way that makes sense, rather than looking at the structure that is most plausible. Because I was choosing very specific games, therefore it would have been far better to say some kind of sequel, some kind of content, rather than going for Nintendo Switch 2 edition specifically, because there you've ended up with 2 different factors. There's the nature of the games themselves, and I think it was always the case that it was likely that one of these 4 games would have something to follow it up, because they are major content for Nintendo. But in the form of a Nintendo Switch 2 edition, well, that brings that down in a different way. But at any rate, that's the way we are. Metroid, Kirby, and or Fire Emblem in August or September. Well, Fire Emblem was in September, but I still think there is a possibility we could get something Metroid. Sports or fitness game by the end of 2026, yes. Fire Emblem Fortunes Weave receives a date in the next General Direct. Yes, it did. Kirby game revealed, no. At least 3 new Mario Universe games, no. 30%. And by the way, with the Mario Universe games, like, I'm not expecting anything massive. I mean, Hello Mario would be, potentially one. We've had really small Mario titles before. I think it's completely plausible that they will continue to fill their boots with Mario titles, especially when you add in, and again, I'm counting Nintendo Switch 2 edition, so they could well have done, Paper Mario, Mario and Luigi, and Princess Peach Showtime all as a trilogy, much like they did the Xenoblade games. But of course, that didn't happen. Just a little cut there because I realised that I had not actually calculated correctly for the 30%. So 50%, actually, yeah, I got 6 right, 6 wrong. So that is exactly 50%, which happens sometimes. That's pretty cool. Okay, 30%. So we've got at least 3 new Mario Universe games announced. I know. Mario Kart World feature the next Direct, no. Some of these ones in black are ones which clearly aren't yet ready to be assessed, because they could still happen. Something new from Pikmin, revealed in the June Direct, no. That really bugged me out. I'd love to have seen something Pikmin. An old property, no. I'd have thought Tom and Actually Life would be more likely than Pocopia, but we got Pocopia. And then there's a lot of no's here. You can sort of have a read of them, but the balance is that this is far more towards no's. So this comes to 18% of these 30% calls were right, which again falls just outside the 20 to 40% range that I would be aiming for a full year of forecasts, or a substantial time of forecasts. But actually, I know it's quite a lot of forecasts, but it's a relatively small number. For a relatively small sample size, I guess it's not too bad. I'm sort of 12% outside the mark, not just on this one, but also on my 90%, it's on my 70%. So it seems to be quite a consistent amount that I'm off. And I'm not necessarily off in a consistent way. Like, I'm over with my 70s and I'm under with the 90s and the 30s. So, it's just an interesting little thing to play around with, not to be taken too seriously. So the ones that obviously I could give myself that I didn't notice before was a game Shadow dropped or released in a very short window, and that was the new Nintendo Switch 2 edition of the original Xenoblade Chronicles Definitive Edition, because I'd completely forgotten until I just checked that this was actually something which is out now, I believe, or at least out very imminently, even though the physical edition will come later. Okay, so let's move on to the 10%, and there's a lot of 10% here. Difficult ones, the 10%. Again, like the 90%, they can catch you out because things you think are ridiculous suddenly come careering around the corner. Didn't expect them to be going back to Donkey Kong Bonanza this soon, but yeah, they did. And but mostly this is pretty much a wash. So I've got 3% of these 10% calls came off, and partly that's because I think if this were a slightly more, what's the word, ambitious direct, a kind of direct that's more consistent with the sorts of things that they were doing in April and even March of last year, then I think we might have got a couple more things which would have nudged this up towards the sort of 10% boundary. Could get Luigi's Mansion 4. I didn't expect Luigi's Mansion 4, obviously, but it's the kind of thing that could have come careering around the corner. But no, it's obviously something where they're keeping the lid on fairly tightly for the time being. At any rate, that is the state of the forecasts for the last few weeks. So only to the direct ones, really. I'm not going to redo the whole thing. I'm not going to do a full analysis. I don't really like to try to over scrutinize the forecasts until I actually come to sit down and do a review, because you just need that big sample size, and sometimes you just need a bit of patience and faith that, eventually, yes, you'll go up and down and things will career around, but it'll just map out to being broadly right. So I've got 78% of my 90% calls, 82% of my 70% calls, 50% of my 50% calls, 14% of my 30% calls, and 3% of my 10% calls. And of course, given that it was a pretty low-key direct, that kind of naturally followed that all of them were under rather than over. But, we'll have another go and we'll see in the future. If you enjoyed this, then thank you so much for watching, and I'll look forward to seeing you next time for another Nintendo Forecast.